Let's talk about then immigration, the southern border
Yeah.
and what is going on there. So in my view, I would think a libertarian attitude on that would be just let them come in and let them compete with the Americans that are here. What do you say to that?
That's the view of some libertarians, and I think it's ludicrous. It's paraded around as the libertarian viewpoint, but it is not really a principled libertarian view. And here's why. If we had a private property society where there was only private property, the only borders that would exist on that property would be the borders around your property, right? So nobody could enter that property unless you invited them or let them in. The same should apply to the United States. Public property, or so-called state property, is really the property of citizens. So citizens should have the right to determine who comes into the country and who doesn't, based on an invitation basis. So that if a company wants to invite workers to work at their plant or their whatever, then they can be invited by that company, and that company would be liable for them economically and legally. That's really how it should work. We should not have open borders. That's trespassing. Not only is, I'm not talking about how it's a violation of the law of federal law. I'm talking about how it's trespassing upon the private property, really, of citizens. And these libertarians who say open borders, just let it flood in, they are not considering the rights of the people who live here. They're only looking at the putative rights of those people who aim to move here. And that's not equitable. That's not fair, and that's a violation of property rights. So I stand on
So the extreme of that viewpoint, that thinking of like open borders because it's libertarian, would be like open my house and let anybody come in and out.
That's right. That's effectively what it means.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, so I often say this to people that say, hate is not welcome here, or whatever signs they put up. Okay, so when are you allowing this family to move in or pitch a tent in your backyard? So, I mean, this is the problem. There are people that are willing to sacrifice your property for their so-called moral conscience and possibly, virtue signaling. And that's just nonsense.
So you're more about about property rights.
Right.
And individual being your own property. So I am my own property.
That's first.
And I own my own property and my own business. And I should be allowed to do whatever I want with myself, with my property, and with my business.
Absolutely. Perfect.
Okay. And that does not mean just letting anybody come in and do what they want in my house or in my business or anything. And you're saying that the United States...
Yeah. There is one caveat. You can't infringe upon other people's rights to their person and property. So that's called the non-aggression principle in libertarianism. And I hold to that, of course. That's the primary principle you can't deviate from and be a libertarian.
Right. I mean, it's like I've got myself, my property, my home, my business, but that doesn't mean your home and your business and your self is mine. That would be antithetical to the principle, right? Yeah, okay.
That's exactly right.
Okay, so that brings me to COVID. During the COVID pandemic, the government basically told us that our bodies were not our bodies, that our bodies belonged to them collectively, and that we needed to do with our bodies what they wanted us to do in order to stop the spread, right? That was their whole reasoning, was lockdown, stop the spread. Mm-hmm. So they forced us into that, or they forced us into masking, or they forced us into vaccines. And hopefully that's all gone. But what was your stance during COVID, during the pandemic?
Absolutely total rebellion against the whole regime. I would have nothing to do. I wanted nothing to do with it. I opposed it throughout. I wrote prolifically against all that was happening. I believed, and I still do, that it was a totalitarian. It was kind of like a foray into totalitarianism here, and to see how far it could go. And I think that's what was being established, using masking as a form of compliance and signaling, and using vaccination as a kind of passport to be allowed to move and have work, and using social distancing as a way of just disciplining the subject to make sure they know that they have to do certain things and abide by these precepts, or going to be shunned and so forth, or thrown out of a store. All of this stuff was just an exercise in totalitarianism, and I opposed it all the way through. I oppose, and I want to get investigations into just how this happened, how this vaccine regime was foisted on us, who started all of this. In fact, going back to the origin of the virus itself, through Fauci and, all the way back to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and then, of course, Echo Alliance in Boston, and how they were responsible for creating this virus in the first place. And then, what connections do they have with the vaccine makers? I'd like to know all of this.
Yeah.
And there should be investigations into all this.
Do you think that we should even have like a department, like a CDC or federal? This is one thing too with a lot of libertarians that I spoke to during the pandemic, was that they believe there shouldn't have even been an FDA at all. Like there should be no regulation on, which, my beef with the FDA was that they just rush things through. They're not effective in that way. But I do still think that there should be some sort of control over what is being offered to me on the market. Somebody can say to me, oh yeah, this is what this product does. This is what this drug does. And then I find out 10 years later, it actually gives you cancer. It would be nice in my mind to have a regulatory body that actually ensures, if it's used correctly, to ensure that drugs and medicines and injections or whatever are safe. But what is your stance on organizations, or I should say agencies like the FDA?
Well, what happens with regulatory agencies, as even RFK Jr. points out, is they get captured. So they get captured by the companies and the bodies that they're supposed to regulate. And I think this is inevitable. I don't think there's a way you can keep this from happening. So as long as you have regulators, there's a way to subvert their regulatory processes, and that's done through these constant circulations between employees and the regulatory agencies, the funding of these agencies for research by the very companies that are being regulated supposedly. So this is just the hand in glove. So, and then also it gives this false impression that something is safe because the federal government said so. Now, I don't know why anybody would believe them about anything, let alone this. And so I don't think these regulatory agencies are good. I think they'll always be captured, and I don't think there's a way around it. The only way to get rid of regulatory capture is to get rid of regulators.
But I worry if it comes down to, if we don't have these regulators at all, and we're just going to end up with all these I see these commercials on TV that'll say, oh, this is good for you. And then you find out in the fine print, sugar's good for you, brought to you by Big Sugar, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
we conducted our study, and our study showed that, 5 teaspoons of sugar a day is going to keep you living long or whatever. And then you find out that it's actually funded by those the people that would benefit the most. So my worry would be that all these studies that come out would end up being just, bullshit studies that are just funded by the people who are trying to make money.
I think what would happen is you'd have agencies, private agencies that would would have a reputation of being impartial with reference to different, to drugs, for example, and testing. And they would be like a body that other companies would use, more than one company would go to. And that would cause a kind of a marketplace in both regulators, and in the medications and so forth that are being produced. It's a long argument, so I don't know if I can make the whole thing right now, but this kind of thinking has been worked out, and I could go on, but I don't want to take too much time.
Okay.